All right, welcome to the Praxis Behind the Obscure podcast. And today I have a special guest who's actually a friend over here in South Korea. We connected, I don't know, maybe about 2 years ago, I believe, through
Yeah,
Facebook, right? And
yeah.
I think it was through like a posting I did, I believe. I don't even really remember, but I think I posted about like starting an esoteric studies group here in Seoul. And then I think that's how we connected. Do you even remember?
Yeah, my memory, and it could be faulty, but my memory, my memory is that a mutual friend of ours who will remain nameless, um, in Korea, a mutual friend of ours introduced the two of us, or at least he. My memory is that he told me, "Hey, there's this guy that you might like to chat with because he's interested in similar things as yourself." And yeah, I think that's my memory.
Okay, yeah, it was probably one or the other, or maybe a combination of both, right?
Yeah,
But
right.
yeah, exactly. It's funny, that kind of shows like how memory can be sort of misleading, right? Like you always have like people have different versions of what they saw at the time, right? Or like so it's
Yeah.
always kind of sketchy when you base everything off of a memory. But anyways, yeah, for the
Memory is
listeners, yeah, oh, go ahead,
memory
yeah.
is memory is creative.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, for the listeners though, like we've been chatting for I don't know, it's been like a couple years, but for the listeners, can you kind of introduce yourself and just in general how you got into the esoteric and occult because you go back like, it's been many years for you, right? Like 20, 30
Yes,
years.
I have 10 or 15 years on you. So as far as age is concerned, and yeah, so let me introduce myself and how I got into the occult. Um, let's see. I'm a teacher in Korea. I teach at a university, and I've been here for quite a while. I love my job. I've been here for about 16 years. Before that, I was a teacher for about 2 or 3 years in California. I moved to Korea because I was teaching at sort of a low level, and it wasn't solid, reliable work. It was me. What's it called? Uh, Substitute teaching,
Mhm.
and I would describe that as the best part-time job ever. But sometimes in life, you don't want a part-time job, right? I mean, you need a full-time job, and so I was having difficulty getting into the teaching thing. Like I wanted to ideally teach math at the high school level, but I kept taking the tests, and in California, they make the tests rather hard unless you have like, let's it, let's say if you majored in math in college, then it's easy. They'll just let you be a teacher. But uh, that was not my major in college. So
Mhm.
anyhow, I liked teaching, so that's why I came over to Korea. As far as how did I get involved in the occult? Well, I would say that is the fault of my sister and my mom mainly. They're both what I would describe as very witchy people, especially my mom.
Mhm.
I remember at a young age, my mom breaking out the tarot at parties and stuff. And okay, by the way, I was born in 1971. So, like, when you're a little kid, and if you're born in 1971, then this is like the mid 70s, right? And so the mid 70s, sure, like tarot and all that kind of stuff, it's so popular, like hippie shit, like
Mhm.
so popular. So yeah, my mom, very witchy person. And I always thought of myself as like a spiritual and mystical sort of person. That's just the way my mom sort of encouraged me to think of myself.
Mhm.
But it wasn't until later that it sort of deepened for me, and that was when I met a friend. I dropped out of high school uh, in my junior year, or right after my junior year finished. I
Mhm.
dropped out of high school, and then I enrolled immediately in a community college. And at that community college, I met what was to be one of my best friends for a few years. And he introduced me to the Thoth deck and Aleister Crowley and a bunch of other things.
Okay, interesting. So sort of, it sounds like the background or your sort of family environment was already had like occult and mystical elements, but it wasn't until later on
Yeah,
in college you kind
yeah,
of came around and connected with that deck and everything. And um, yeah, I think that you mentioned, we haven't really talked in detail about this, but I think that you mentioned you didn't you eventually join like the Thelemic Golden Dawn Order or something along those lines?
yes. So I was about 17 when I met this person that I mentioned,
Mhm.
and uh, so I, after a short time of knowing him, I realized that he was interested in all these things, which I wanted to know more about. And so I said, "Hey, will you like sort of take me under your wing and like uh, teach me what you know?" And he says, "Sure." And like a short time after that, maybe let's say 6 months or so, um, the Thelemic Golden Dawn, or the Thelemic Order of the Golden Dawn, either way is fine, was being birthed. In its first year is officially 1990, but it was sort of in gestation in 1988 and 1989.
Hmm. Okay, and this is in Southern California, I think you mentioned, right?
That's right. That's right.
Hmm.
So my friend and I, we both live in Orange County,
Hmm.
and he introduced me to David Cherubim, who was the main leader of the. Let's just call it for. It's easier to call it the TGD,
Mm.
the Thelemic Golden Dawn. So he was the leader of the TGD, and but he lived in LA, and
Hmm.
so I started attending magic classes in 1990. His magic classes, David Cherubim,
Hmm.
and after seeing him like teach, he was a really good teacher.
Mm.
Um, he recently died a couple years ago, but
Ah, okay.
he was about let me see. I took some notes here. He was about 6 or 7 years my senior. So he was born in 1964, David Cherubim. But I was attending his magic classes and I really loved him. And so I thought, okay, this order that they're planning sounds like really cool. So I asked him, I'd like to join. He says, sure, that's fine. And I ended up joining in uh, spring equinox 1991.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So I don't really know much about that order. To me, it's kind of interesting because you have Thelema and the Golden Dawn, right, in one name, and that's
Uh,
I mean, people associate them, but they don't really consider them the same thing per se and whatnot, right?
mhm,
So what
yeah.
what can maybe you can tell the
Well, let's
listeners?
talk about that a little bit.
Yeah,
So,
what exactly is it? Yeah.
so it's a funny thing. Like, if you go onto the Thelema boards,
Hmm.
a lot of times you will see people say, "Oh, well, the Golden Dawn is old Aeon, and Thelema is new Aeon," right? And
Hmm.
in a sense, that is true. But if you look at One Star in Sight, you'll notice that the name of the first order is the GD.
Right. Right. So this would you say this order is kind of covering um, sort of like the preliminary work?
Okay, so I never joined the OTO, so I don't have any firsthand experience with that. So on the one hand, I cannot contrast the TGD with anything else. It was the only order that I ever belonged to. However, that said, I have talked to other people and gotten an impression from reading various books and whatnot. I have gotten an impression about other orders and other ways of doing things.
Hmm.
But so like if you were to do an image search for the Golden Dawn and stuff, you'll see a lot of colorful implements, and the furniture of the temple and the temple itself is extremely colorful.
Hmm.
And then they wear these sort of ridiculous robes, right, which are also colorful.
Hmm.
And so it has a slightly Masonic feel, because the initiations, for example, are sort of the GD was born of the SRIA which was around 1850, and it has Masonic roots, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So they is it similar in the sense that they practice like group rituals and things like this, whereas the AA is sort of a teacher to student one-on-one thing? Is that
Right,
one of the,
right, right,
that's kind of
right,
one of the
right.
major differences?
Yes, 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 totally. Like now, I don't have any firsthand experience with the AA. However, what I've read, yeah, would confirm what you're talking about.
Okay, cool. Yeah, you mentioned I've seen his name come up, David Cherubim. Hopefully I pronounced that right. But
That's right.
okay, cool. You mentioned that he was like a really good teacher. What kind
Yes.
of qualities or what would you say about the way that he taught was specifically, very good and beneficial to you?
Cool. So I was pretty young at the time and pretty impressionable, but that as a given, I think I'm a pretty good judge of character, and I have a good sort of intuitive sense about people, and I'm pretty good at identifying hucksters and liars and stuff like that. And but my impression of David, and I was later to become fairly close friends with him, sort of apart from the order. But
Mhm.
um, as a teacher, I liked his style because what he would do was basically he would lead a direct instruction class of 30 to 60 minutes, and then he would have like a what's it called, like a demonstration of some kind, like if his class was about tarot, then he might lead like a path working type meditation. If his uh, lecture was about let's say a ritual, say the phoenix, the ritual mass of the phoenix, then he would demonstrate the mass of the phoenix for everybody to see. And so you could go home and have a much clearer idea of what this magic thing was all about by having been exposed, sort of face to face, having come face to face with it.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah. Sounds like he sort of it's kind of both, right? Like he gave you the lectures and the knowledge, but then also like practical experience and showing how it actually looks or how to perform it in person could be a
Right.
very, very beneficial, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is a lot different than just reading in a book, right? Because it's easy to misunderstand or
Yeah,
um,
well, the thing is like if let's say you're 17 or 18 or whatever, and you just pick up this book, you might think, well, wow, like it's impressive. It seems really cool, but a lot of it is hard to figure out. Or even if you were, let's say 30 or 40, it doesn't matter how old you were. If you just look
sure.
at the text, there's a lot of things that are not very clear in Crowley's writing, for example.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Yeah, a lot of people, this is something that you see online a lot, but since you come from a background of actually studying with a group or an order, and then obviously now you're kind of on your own doing your own thing, but do you
Uh-huh.
think that there is value in, joining a group or an order, or do you think that it's sort of better just to kind of go on your own, or do you think it's kind of an individual basis? What would you say?
Um, now, I suppose everybody's different. And so, in a sense, like, I'm not real comfortable
Hmm.
speaking about what other people should do, right? But
Sure.
on the other hand, I did introduce a couple of my friends to the order, and they seemed to get a lot out of it. But the whole time that I introduced them to it, because it was similar to me. Like I didn't just hear about the TGD and then join, but instead, like I went to David's classes. I got a feeling for like what the hell he was doing, what the hell this magic thing was about. And so there was at least about a year before I ended up being initiated. A
Hmm.
year of me listening to David and seeing what kind of a person he was, and like also another good reason, or another reason why David, I felt, was a really good teacher was he was always open to people's questions. He was always fielding questions. If you had any kind of questions, he was very, yeah, he let people ask whatever they wanted to ask. But anyways, so your question is, do I think it's a good or a bad thing or whatever? But I would say it's a good thing, but everybody's different. And so, I mean, it might not be a good thing for you. I, in my right now in my life, I'm comfortable just being a solo practitioner. But if I found a good order where I found people I liked, I thought what they were doing was cool, I would love to. Then I would join again another order. But for right now in Korea, there's not many opportunities for that.
Right, definitely. Yeah, another person that you've mentioned to me quite a bit through our chats was Christopher Hyatt, and also I don't really know that much about him, but maybe you can also talk a little bit. Did you ever get a chance to meet up with him, or it seems like you've kind of studied and maybe practiced some of his work? Kind of curious to
Yeah.
know about him.
Yeah. Okay. So that was getting to know Hyatt was also part of my pre-initiation. Like first I read some of his books, then I ended up giving him a call. A friend of mine, the same guy I alluded to earlier, a friend of mine gave me his phone number. And so on the phone, I'm like introducing myself, and he says, okay, let's meet on my boat in Long Beach. And I thought, okay, well, that sounds weird, right? By the way, so Hyatt's years, he was born in 1943 and he died, unfortunately, in 2008. So he wasn't that young or that old, really, when he died. But when I knew him, he was roughly in his mid 40s, basically. So I met him on his boat, and basically, like I was expressing my interest in joining the TGD, and he was sort of gauging my suitability for that order. His background is in Reichian physiotherapy, which we did a little bit of that on his boat, and very basic stuff because we were only on his boat for about 90 minutes. And yeah, he has a background in Reichian physiotherapy. He started Falcon Publishing in 1980, and in the United States, there was only a couple publishing houses, Weiser, Falcon, and maybe one or two others that were, up until, let's say, 1994 or something. There was only a couple publishing companies that were publishing Crowley. So you would, if you were interested in that kind of thing, you definitely came across Falcon Publishing. One of the main authors what is it called? The sort of marquee authors was Robert Anton Wilson.
Right. That's why the name is very familiar, actually. Oh, that's pretty cool. Oh,
and Hyatt was also at my initiation. So there were many memorable things about my 1991 spring equinox initiation, but him actually being there and participating in the initiation, that was also a highlight that I can't forget.
Oh, that's amazing. For somebody who's interested in checking out his work, where would you recommend to start? Because I'm sure a lot of people, like, I've heard of him even prior to you mentioning him, but I haven't really read through any of his stuff. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who may listen who may not be familiar.
Okay.
Where would you recommend, what book or books would you recommend checking out?
Well, there's really one that comes to mind. There's a lot of his later work that I haven't bothered to check out, but one of his first works is called Undoing Yourself. UNDOING, Undoing Yourself. And then it has a subtitle, something like Energized Meditation or something like that.
That sounds interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I've heard of that one as well. Yeah, definitely have to check that out.
It has very hatha yoga type oriented exercises, and also you've read Prometheus Rising, correct?
Yes.
Okay, it's similar in spirit, very much to that.
Okay, that sounds excellent. I'll have to check that out. Yeah, I'm curious because we've been talking back and forth for a couple years about esotericism, occultism, and other topics. But what do you think are common misunderstandings of this area? Because you mentioned that a mutual friend, you guys are into this kind of the same weird shit or whatever, right? But what would you say are some common misunderstandings of the occult or even of Thelema since that's kind of a major branch of it, right?
Okay. Well, it's almost like where to start, right? We could have at least 2 or 3 shows on this, right?
Yeah, right.
Each show being 2 hours long, but some of my gripes would be, okay, so I recently bought 2 books on basically like a historical take on Satanism. Okay. And Satanism as a thing doesn't actually get started until the mid 19th century. Okay. And so in this way, in this manner of speaking, or the sense that I mean here, Satanism is where somebody decides, here is a character we all know, and I'm going to worship him. Okay, that's what Satanism is, right? And if you look at the historical record, like if you study witchcraft, for example, historical witchcraft and historical quote unquote Satanism, you will find the same thing. It doesn't appear in the historical record until the mid 19th century. And so people's idea of even just something so simple as Satanism is wrong. So like, for example, most people think of, when you say witchcraft, they might think as a synonym, they might think Satanism, right? But if you go ahead.
Even if you think of like Crowley, right? Like if I mention him to friends, they'll be like, oh, that he's like a Satanist, or, you know, even for people who haven't even read any of what he put out there, it's sort of automatically, I feel like he's associated with like Satanism or devil worship or something like that, right?
Right. And devil worship, similarly, is not really a thing until the mid 19th century. So all the witch burnings and stuff, so, and like the grimoires, for example, if you look at the grimoires, I mean, there's 2 basic explanations for these grimoires. Number 1, there's a quote unquote clerical underground, or a necromantic clerical underground. And number 2, it's just sort of like folk magic, right? But in both instances, basically, these are Christians who are doing this stuff. And witchcraft in this sense is more like natural magic and like, you know, making herbal like remedies and stuff. I mean, there's a variety of ways to understand witchcraft and Satanism and all that kind of thing. But most of the ways that regular people who don't look into this, or the occult for that matter, who don't look at this, they have a completely wrong idea, you know, like, and then like Aleister Crowley, for example, he's not even, in a sense, he's not even writing about magic. He's writing more about mysticism than he is magic.
That's a good point. Right. Which is kind of that's a whole conversation itself. How do you differentiate? Like, what do you see the difference between mysticism and magic being?
Okay, so there's an interesting thing. If you look at scholarly studies in regards to magic, what you end up finding is that magic is other people's religion, just like the devil is other people's god.
Well, that's a good explanation. Yeah.
So magic is in a very real sense not very hard to. It's hard to draw a line between where does magic start and religion end, or religion start and magic end, or whatever. Like, so if you look at the Catholic Mass, for example, if you were an alien, you would look at that and you'd be like, oh, they're doing magic. Cool. Right on. You know?
Right.
So like, but one of the main sort of differences that scholars see, a common difference between what what a lot of times is regarded as sort of vanilla religion, and then magic uses the language of commanding, whereas religion uses the language of like asking.
Okay.
So like, for example, if you think of the regular common Christian prayer, it's like, please God, please do this, please, you're not commanding God, right?
Sure. Sort of supplicating to.
Right. Supplication. Exactly. Whereas if you look at, a basic ritual, like, for example, the invocation of Thoth or Tahuti, at the beginning, it might sound like supplication, but you get in towards the middle and it's an identification with the God. And you all of a sudden are like basically the creator of the universe.
So it has a sense of agency, so to speak, right? Like
yes,
it's sort of the empowerment of the individual within this sort of maybe unified field of consciousness, or however you want to describe it, right? Whereas religion would be, to some degree, at least the way you're explaining it, it's almost like a separation, or you and then the God outside that you're either like supplicating to or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I see a lot of maybe blogs or posts about like the differences between magic and mysticism, and it seems like a lot of people these days sort of lean more towards like sort of what would you say? Sort of not skipping the mysticism part and then going straight into like, I'm just going to jump straight into like some sort of like practical magic, right? Like practical operations. And so what's your view on that? Because for you kind of started with you joined that order and sort of trained in mystical practices, right? Do you think that, I mean, it's obviously, again, up to the individual, but do you see there being value in having some background in mystical practices as well? Sort of like how Crowley taught and other orders throughout time?
Well, I like Jake Stratton-Kent's take on this. He says basically like there's been this unfortunate pattern in Western mystery tradition where like white magic is okay and black magic is bad. And then if you say, okay, well, let me accept that for the moment, but what is white magic? And then basically it's like studying books, and then what is black magic? It's doing stuff. It's actually, performing whatever, rites that are quote unquote practical, get you something.
Yeah. So would you say that it's really, do you see them as like totally different then? In other words, like if one cared to just totally skip the mysticism part because that's not, where someone's interests lie, or there's not necessarily value. Do you see them as like feeding off one another? I guess that's what I'm trying to ask. Like, would you say like practicing practical magic could help you maybe in mysticism, or having a solid foundation in mysticism could help you the other way around as well?
Yeah, I mean, okay, let me give you an example. I think that Crowley's system is pretty much the best system that is available for Western people. And his system is a combination of magic and mysticism, yoga and magic. Now, Crowley says that basically at the beginning, if you have not yet attained your HGA, any other magic is black magic. Now, I can agree or disagree with him on that point, but it is one of his sort of doctrines, and interestingly, it puts the lie to the whole like, oh well, he's evil, or he's he's doing bad stuff. It's like, well, I don't know.
Right. Whereas like most of the system is really aimed towards sort of spiritual attainment.
Yeah,
And like you said, he doesn't even really advise, or at least in his system, doing like practical magic doesn't come till later on, right? Much
yeah,
later on.
yeah.
But I think that, as you mentioned, Jake Stratton-Kent, he's someone who's came along and kind of flipped everything over, right?
Yeah,
At least
shaking things up. Yeah, yeah.
right, exactly. And I actually, I learned about him, I believe, through you. I've heard of him maybe like once through a book, like mentions or something like that, or posts that I read. But you were the one who was like, really, you got to check out this book. I think you mentioned to me a few times, and I was like, all right, well, I think I finally cracked. I was like, okay, I got to check out some of his writing, right? Because if you're mentioning it that much, it's like, okay, it's probably a reason, right? Like if it was like a light suggestion, you wouldn't be so vocal about it, I suppose, right? And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I was just really blown away by the guy's writing style. Just because I know I've read quite a lot of material, and I definitely have an appreciation for his writing style. It's almost like leagues or levels beyond a lot of other writing out there, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
not even just the content, but like just the style in general, I would say. But yeah, like
Yeah,
you said. Oh, go ahead.
the style is great because like it feels on the one hand pretty academic, but on the other
Yeah.
hand, like not stuffy, you know?
Right. Ooh, that's a really good way to describe it. It is very academic, very historic, a
Yeah,
lot of references, but at the same time, it's very engaging. Like you're reading, like you're going on an adventure. It's
yeah,
not like dry researched material that you get from a lot of like Grimoire historians, I guess you would say, or
right, right.
which are interesting too in their own right, but they don't. The writing style doesn't really. It's like being in a history class versus like a cool history podcast or something. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like I don't know if have you ever listened to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History? Have you heard of that podcast?
I think I've heard of it, but I haven't listened.
Yeah, but that's kind of how it feels to me. He's very
Cool.
he tells like stories of history. Like the Mongol series is really good, and like I've read about Mongolian history, but then when you listen to that podcast, he goes through all like the real important details, but it just presented in such a it's packaged up so well, and it's so engaging. There's never a moment of boredom. That's how at least when I feel when I read
Hmm.
Jake's writing, it's like I'm never you read a lot of other people's writing, you kind of like doze off, or I've heard that before, or but when you read
I mean,
Jake, at least for me, Jake's writing is very engaging.
to be honest, it reminds me a lot of Crowley himself. Like
Hmm.
that's one of the great things about Crowley is there's a lot of humor in his writing, but it's fairly serious, stuff at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would say that too. um but yeah, Jake in general, he's sort of mixed things up or shake things up. What are
Yeah,
some
yeah.
major what would you say, like mental shifts or perspectives that changed or new ideas that formed after reading his writing? Because you're a lot more versed in his writing than me. I'm just kind of like getting into it. Read maybe like 3 or 4 of his books so far, I think.
Well, in a sense, like uh, a lot of what I have gotten from Jake's writing is not so much like new information, but rather confirmation of things that I already knew, but I wanted to hear more about. So let me give you a
Mm.
couple. Let me give you a couple examples. Number one, the sort of centrality of myth in magic. Um,
Hmm.
this is like something I think that the witchy people or the Wiccan people or the witchcraft people, they do a lot better than the Thelema people. The Thelema
Mm.
people seem to like just like take all the juice out of magic and like put everything to the Kabbalah. It's just everything fits into the Kabbalah.
Right.
Like
Right.
after you've sliced and diced everything that thinly, there's no juice left. You've sucked it dry. There's nothing there anymore, right? And so
Mm.
I feel like Jake has reinvigorated a possibly thelemic viewpoint. Now you don't have to be thelemic to enjoy Jake, but
Mhm.
he definitely has a thelemic stripe to him. So that's one thing. The centrality of myth in magic, and the one of the second things. What was I thinking? Uh, think it's escaped me for the moment.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said though, because like even me doing my own practice and own studies, it's like
Mm,
sometimes when I discuss them with people, it's like I feel like it's almost like they want to do anything they can to fit it into the Kabbalah framework, and it almost
right.
gets irritating. It's like why
Yeah.
it's almost
Yeah.
like they have this. I'm not even saying that Kabbalah isn't a great roadmap or the tree of life. It can be, right? And I mean, it has its usage. At least in my eyes, it has. It's interesting. It has its applications and what have you. But at the same time, it's like if you're filtering every single experience through it, it's almost like you're not actually fully in these experiences anyways, because you're already in that analytical, how can I fit this into this model that it's almost dogmatism really, I feel.
Okay, I remember the other thing that I wanted to bring up in regards to. I feel like reading Jake was like I really would have loved to have had the like Gia Sophia, one of the volumes in his Encyclopedia Goetica. I really would have loved to have had this like in 1990 or 1995, but unfortunately it came out like around 2010. But okay, so the other thing was like the ancient origins, number one, and number two, the incorrect labeling of Goetia. So when people, unfortunately, Crowley sort of he propagates this notion of Goetia as a book, but Goetia is not a book. Goetia is basically it means magician, and it's unfortunately it's like a term of abuse, or it became a term of abuse. If you go back to around 300 BC or something like that, I don't think it had those negative connotations. But so there's high magic and low magic, right? And low magic was Goetia, right? And high magic was what the Magus does, right? And so him teasing out that thing was really like felt really good and felt freeing to me. And then the other thing was the sort of ancient origins, right? Like my intro to magic was very scholarly. I would read books like by Walter Burkert, who he did a lot of research into mainly like Greek mythology, and he published a lot of his books in the 70s and 80s. I think even before as well. But like, yeah, I mean, if you look at, for example, the Eleusinian mysteries, right? Like there's a definitely magical sort of vibe with these Eleusinian mysteries, right?
Oh, no doubt. No doubt.
And, I mean, to me, like if you're a modern practitioner, you might want to look into this kind of thing. But unfortunately, a lot of Thelema people are just like, well, it doesn't fit into my Kabbalah. I can't. It does not compute. Does not compute.
Right. And that's a really good point. It's I think it's easy, I suppose, if you're kind of starting out from like a GD or Thelemic background, to kind of think like that's when everything started, rather than
Right.
that's when some people assembled knowledge and the knowledge they had at the time into a system that they made, right? Rather than like now that's kind of like it's almost like an occult renaissance in a way, where you have all these scholars and practitioners like digging up like original manuscripts or even some of the same material that the Golden Dawn used, right? And sort of getting more fuller translations of it and practicing it rather than through an actual or a different, rather than through sort of the Kabbalah framework that the Golden Dawn kind of ran it through, I guess you would say, right? I actually saw something the other day. I couldn't stop laughing. I think it said, hopefully I don't butcher the quote. It was something like the Golden Dawn. I actually can pull it up. Hold on. I think I saved it. It was something about, it related the Golden Dawn to Microsoft. Hold on. Okay, here it is. I actually found it. The Golden Dawn brand was eventually to become a kind of Microsoft in the esoteric subculture. in such a world, the decisions that Mathers made while poring over his books have kind of taken on a life of their own. So I think that's a pretty pertinent quote in regards to sort of, going back and kind of seeing how things were at the time, and not necessarily going through that Microsoft, because ultimately these are all sort of operating systems in a way, right? Like Thelema or Golden Dawn or whatever ideology or system you decide to take on, right?
Hyatt wrote another book. I think he had a co-author with this book, but it was called Pax with the Devil. It was published in 1993, and it was sort of ahead of its time, especially from sort of a Thelemic perspective, which has been allergic for so long of these grimoire traditions. And it included like 3 or 4 different grimoires in there. And Jake quote or cites this book in a few of his books. So that was another thing I appreciated about Hyatt, was he was willing to look at these things that other people were not looking at the time.
Okay. Yeah, and it's sort of reached a not a climax, but it's just very popular for people to go back and dig in. But that being said, I almost feel like this is just my perspective, but I want to get your take too. At the same time, like we're kind of talking about the like the Thelema, the Golden Dawn side, but at the same time, I almost feel like there's other people on the other extreme, I guess you would say, where it's like it's almost like they're going back. It's like they expect to find some hidden secret. Like, does that make sense? It's like, oh, if I just undig one more manuscript, then it's like this search for the holy grail that's probably not there. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
Totally. What's your kind of view on that? Like, I actually really like that people are digging up and translate. I think it's amazing, to be honest.
So to be honest, my engagement with the grimoires right now is almost nil. I am interested in it in sort of a detached intellectual manner. I'm not a practitioner of that. So I don't spend most of my day thinking about judging how other people are approaching it, because I don't know the right way, right?
Sure.
And let me just confess to you, like the things that hold a lot of meaning for me. Okay, so I like something called the Avatamsaka Sutra. It's a Buddhist sutra. It's known as the flower, or in English, it's called the flower garland. The Flower Garland Sutra, which your Buddha, when you visited that Buddhist temple, he mentioned it. It is in my view, a criminally underappreciated, at least in the occult community, book. Like, it's an amazing book. It presents a vision of infinity which will blow your socks off. So that's one of my major influences, and it to this day, it's just I have not seen many things that can compare to this thing, the Avatamsaka Sutra. Really, I would recommend all viewers or listeners who are interested in Buddhism to check that out. And then let's see.
Actually, I actually looked it up. You can find that online. Like, you can download a PDF of it, but and there's also like I also found a summary of it somewhere online that you can download. But it does seem like a somewhat hard text to find, like a physical copy of. Like,
unfortunately. Yeah. Okay, so your listeners might be curious or interested to hear. If they were to publish the whole thing, it would be minimum 20 volumes. It's huge. Now, the version that I read was published in 1993, and it's roughly 1,000 pages. But that is a very abridged edition.
Right. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, the one that I got a copy of, I think it was like 1,100 pages or something like that. But interesting. So that's even an abridged version. It's not even the full version, is what you're saying.
Yeah, right. But it's really big in Korean Buddhism and in East Asian Buddhism and in Mahayana. Another text that I would really recommend all your listeners who are interested in Buddhism to check out is the Vimalakirti Nirdesa. Nirdesa Nirdesa means instruction, and Vimalkirti is the name of a person. Now, supposedly he's a historical friend of the Buddha, a person who lived at the same time as the Buddha. But our first actual examples of this book come from the 2nd century. So people are not certain if he's an actual historical person, but that's how he's presented. That's how he's presented in the book. And the book is mainly about how lay practitioners can attain the highest nirvana.
Yeah, I've actually read that before. It's been quite a while, but yeah, that was a great one. That was definitely a great one. And I'm gonna have to definitely go through the full Avatamsaka Sutra, or Flower Garland Sutra, I believe, right? In English?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, definitely. I think some of these Buddhist texts are definitely underappreciated. And at least when I was studying Buddhism back in America, I think like there are a couple that were common. I think like the Dhammapada was a very big one that most people kind of get into. But yeah, Buddhism just has so many layers of it, and so many sutras and texts, right? I remember looking at the summary. I think Avatamsaka Sutra is almost described as like a psychedelic fractal universe. Sound like the way they described it. There's some reviews of it were really cool. Really awesome.
Now, if you've never read it, you might think, okay, I mean, maybe he's exaggerating. Maybe no. It's totally how it is. It is very much like, if you read this book, you will definitely feel like you're on drugs. I'm not joking.
That's awesome. That's how you know a book's really powerful, right? Like if it give you those kind of effects, right? What about, like, since you've done all these studies and you've been a part of some groups and what have you, do you have any regular practices that you do, either on a daily basis or regularly?
I was going to get into that. The other things that I would say are very much influential on me is Raja Yoga and the Orphic hymns and the Chaldean oracles, and the theurgy of Iamblichus.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I've actually never read the Chaldean oracles. I'm gonna have to go through that. It's a pretty major text.
Okay, so it's interesting, but it can be disappointing because it's a bunch of fragments. And so, like, if you're sort of wanting a story or something that hangs together, unfortunately, the Chaldean oracles do not hold together as much as you might like. But that said, there's some intensely, vivid poetry in there, and that's why I really like it. It's just quite striking.
I'd have to check that out. The theurgy, that's also known as like ancient Egyptian mysteries or something like that.
Okay, so it depends on sort of who you ask and which historical era you're talking about, but the main sort of Iamblichus is the first guy. He's a guy from Syria in like around the 4th century or so. He makes up his own system sort of in response to Plotinus and Porphyry. And it's theurgy. And if you read like Rigardi's book, the Tree of Life, he talks a lot about theurgy and Iamblichus, and that's where I first heard about it. And theurgy is basically just like a way to connect with God.
Yeah, I've read through little parts of it, but I haven't read it in its entirety. That has like the letter to Porphyry too, right?
Right. So one of Iamblichus's main ideas is that the world is holy, and you must use the world to help you get back to God. And so, like, it's often seen as a defense of magic. Okay,
rather than it's sort of the opposite of the Christian doctrine, kind of like the world is fallen and you're sinful.
Well, also in a lot of Christian thought, like there's this very deep distinction between like the heavenly world where God is, and then us in the fallen world, right?
Right.
And Iamblichus says, no, this world is holy because it helps you get back to God.
Okay, and that was written quite a long time ago too, right? Like that was do you recall the year? I think it was like 1700 years ago. I may be way off though. That was my guess.
I'm
It's
sorry.
pretty old.
Are you talking about Iamblichus?
Yes, really old text, right? Like
Yeah. He lived around the 4th century.
4th century. Okay, so that's pretty close. I think I got it.
Yeah.
1700 years ago or so, roughly speaking, right? Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's sort of definitely opposed to the theology that was coming up around that time. It's like, his surrounding, like
Yeah, I mean, he's one of these cool pagan guys, right? He's one of the last pagans. So after the 4th century, paganism is extremely difficult to do because Christianity sort of finally gets a hold of worldly power, and the popes become kings and whatnot, and they decide, okay, you can do one Orthodox Christianity and everything else is out.
Right. That's pretty. It's pretty prolific character. How would you define paganism? Because there's like neo-paganism and paganism. What would you say are like underlying? Maybe like.
Well, I use the term. Okay, there's a variety of ways to use the term, but I use the term generally just to mean anything non-Christian.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's a thing about paganism when I see people use it, including like my mom uses the term quite frequently as well. It seems like everybody has a different, like to me, it doesn't really mean that much because I've heard it been used in so many different ways. Does that make sense?
One of the roots of the word is a country. So it's like the religion of country people.
Okay. So like folk religion or something
Rural,
like that.
yeah.
Rural religion. Okay. Yeah. It usually has kind of like an earthy vibe too, right? Like
exactly, yeah.
I think the way my mom uses sort of like almost like in like a druid context or something like that, like connected like that. But oh yeah, very interesting. All right, so we kind of went over a lot of your influences and sort of books that you recommend or that had a big impact on you. Is there any others you would you want to mention too?
Yeah, so I mentioned Raja Yoga, and so anybody who I ran into this great little section in Equinox Volume 1, Number 4, where Crowley is describing his practice of Raja Yoga in Burma and also in Kandy, Ceylon. With Alan Bennett, and he is talking about how Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga, after a certain bit of time, how they become sort of intertwined. You can't really, you can't separate the one from the other, right? And so a couple years ago, I got the Hatha Yoga Padapika and Shiva Samhita. These are two really easy to read texts. Now, some of it, if you don't have any exposure to Vedanta or to let's say Vivekananda or whatever, then you might find it difficult. But if you do have a little bit of exposure to yoga, they're not that hard, and they include all these different poses, and then they include various like Kundalini, like Raja Yoga type visualization techniques. Really good stuff.
Oh, for sure, yeah. Currently going through the Shiva Samhita right now, actually.
Nice.
Great. Nice. Very good. Yeah, I got really interested in those texts. It was way back, like either high school, must have been the end of high school. My grandma had grandma's like an old school hippie from the 60s, right? So she had like Yogananda books and things like that. So I started reading like Yogananda, and then got into like the Vedanta stuff, Ramakrishna and
nice
Vivekananda, and Went to a few, like, there's actually some Hindu temples too in California, like a Vedanta Society and
Yeah.
self-realization fellowship. Went to some of those many years ago, and then sort of rediscovered them.
You know what's
again.
cool? You know what's cool about the Vedanta Society?
What's that?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think is cool about it is like, okay, so Vivekananda, like I think he died at age 39, really young.
That's fucking nuts. I didn't know that until I think you posted it recently. I had no idea, honestly.
Yeah. So like, here's this guy, and he's like doing the speech circuit all over America and Europe. The guy's crazy. He's doing all these speeches for years, and but anyways, he's the person who sets up the Vedanta Society. I think he does it with another person. But one of the cool things, and this is also this goes back to the two texts I mentioned as well, is they're not really Buddhism and they're not really Hinduism. They're a weird combo of both.
Right. It's almost like, at least I think when I first got into Vedanta and Vivekananda, I think they were described as like a reaction to Buddhism, or like the Hindu response to Buddhism or something like that, right?
Yeah. I think, a lot of times when you get these syncretisms, when you get these eclectic sort of movements, I think what's happening generally is people are responding to dogmatism. They're like, hey, stop telling me what to fucking do. I'd like to do it this way. Right.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, those are great. I mean, the Vedanta literature is definitely great. And if any of the listeners are in America, I'm sure there's still like Vedanta societies. The place that I went, it was really beautiful. This is in California. Really beautiful, great landscapes. And they had all these cool, like Krishna, Jesus, like all these cool, like religious iconography and statues. And it was a very, very like mystical, like temple space, I guess you would say. So definitely check it out if you have the chance.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So we went into the Raja Yoga stuff. That is insane that he put out that much work and went on all the tours. And wasn't he also like one of the first, if not the first, like Eastern yogi or guru to come lecture in the West?
I think yes and no. So like the connections between East and West have been tenuous on the one hand, but not non-existent. So, for example, like you've got Pyrrho, the skeptic, who went via Alexander in the 4th century BCE. He went over to India, and so a lot of people think that his system ended up influencing Buddhism and vice versa. But you've got various people who have, traveled in between the East and West, for millennia and centuries. But yeah, in a modern sense, yeah, I mean, Vivekananda is really like, you can't really compare anybody to him. He's the towering figure.
No doubt. All right, cool. That's a pretty big reading list for a lot of people who might or might not be hearing these books for the first time, right? And even for me, I definitely made some notes on
and then
either read or reread or whatnot.
You mentioned things that maybe I thought where people had misconceptions about magic. So another misconception, I think, and this is where I get controversial.
Yeah, be as controversial as possible. I heard that'll make you go viral.
I think magic is inherently political, and a lot of people have decided that no, if you try to inject politics into magic, it's no longer magic. So now I can actually argue that point. It's not a completely incorrect point. I mean, there is a point where, you're no longer doing magic, you're doing politics, right? But,
sure.
But I do think that, okay, so like Liber 77, for example, Liber Oz, it's a short statement that Crowley put out in 1941, and it was like an anti-fascist statement, sort of timely for its time, probably to support the war effort, the Allies. Forget about Liber 77. I think Magick is about power, and all power has a political aspect to it.
Okay.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, sure. I mean, clearly politics are about power and power structures and the management of power or the abuse of power, right? And I think that, I think that there's definitely a connection. I mean, I think maybe you can elaborate more, but I would say that, at least the way I see it, I think Magick is like individual, sort of empowering the individual, and sort of it gives the individual a sense of agency and the ability to sort of enact or co-create reality, I feel like, in a way. Whereas politics, it's like more of a I don't know, maybe I'm not well,
let me give you a few,
to explain it, but yeah.
Let me give you a few quotes. So do you know Peter Gray?
Yes.
Okay, so he's one of the heads of Scarlet Imprint, and I was reading some of his book, which is a collection of articles, The Brazen Vessel, 2019. He says at one point, angel magic is a political necessity.
That's an interesting statement.
Yeah. So I thought we could discuss that a little bit.
Yeah. What did maybe you can elaborate a little more on that. So what's the context?
Okay, so he also says in the same essay, power and sovereignty are prime occult concerns.
Okay, I would agree with that.
And then he's trying to like say, he's not talking about like SJW wokeism. He's not, he's not talking about, PMC struggle sessions sponsored by Google or your employer, Do you know the term struggle session?
No, actually I don't.
Okay. It is a term from the Cultural Revolution, Mao's Cultural Revolution. And so in the 60s, there was the youth were sort of on fire, and they had these, what they called struggle sessions. And they were like where they would, humiliate their teachers because they were not sufficiently Marxist or communist or whatever.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to say, when I talk about political, I'm not talking about struggle sessions.
Right.
I'm not talking about, like a lot of times if you look in the news, what passes for politics nowadays is, is these liberals trying to shame people for not having the right, viewpoint on this or that. That's not what I think of as politics. That's manipulation. That's fucked.
Right. Exactly. It's a distraction. It's nonsense, I think. So interesting. Okay, so you see what do you see? So you see Magick is inherently political. You see that, like.
Well, the other reason, there's a lot of reasons why I think that. I mean, number one, like we started this conversation, and I was saying like Magick is sort of like the religion of other people, just like the devil. The devil is the god of other people, right? So if you choose to do magic, you are automatically sort of placing yourself in this uncomfortable position. You're putting yourself in a minority position. You're almost self-exiling yourself, right? So how could that not be political, right? How could you do that without any political intent?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I think the ramifications on society or the individual's relationship to society is definitely there.
Right. So that's one aspect. I mean, the other aspect is, you know, at least when we first get into magic, a lot of times it's about self-empowerment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you feel like you lack power of, or agency, and you would like to reclaim that somehow. And so how do you do that? And magic promises to answer that question for you. And I can't see that but as at least mildly political, and maybe very political.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, I think it's sort of giving the power back to the people in a sense, right? And it sort of allows you to chart your own course and design your own reality in a way, as opposed to the scripts that you're receiving from politicians or the news cycle or whatever the agenda of a given country or its administration is, right? I kind of see it. I kind of see at least a connection there as well, because like, okay, so if you're not sort of if you're not deeply questioning things, and if you're not sort of forming your own, if you're not detaching from the imprints that are constantly bombarded on you, then basically magic has been done on you, right? Like you have been, in effect, you are at the effect of the,
or at the mercy,
yeah, of the government's magic, right? Through the symbolism that they use, through the messages that they transmit.
Well, that goes back to another couple things I wanted to bring up was, in a very general or overall or broad sense, I think of the OTO or Thelema or Magick as a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times as being a matter of deprogramming.
Definitely. I can see that. I definitely see that. I think that the way I view a lot of what's going on, at least in politics, although you've made a pretty firm distinction between what politics is and isn't, especially with like the wokeism and the distractions, but I feel like a lot of what you see is like provoking emotional response, and then you're being fed a narrative of what to think about it.
Yeah.
It's like, this is the issue, this is why we're angry at it, and then this is what you're exactly supposed to think about it and post about it, and so it's fundamentally like brainwashing to a large degree, right? And it's using emotional, it's like creating an emotional pain points and then sort of imprinting based on it's almost like marketing to a degree, right? It's like play on your pain points. Like, for example, say you were extremely overweight, right? And I'm like, hey, you don't you feel like a fat piece of shit or whatever, right? And it's like, well, hey, you can still keep eating the same crap, but if you buy this pill, then all your problems will be solved, right? I feel like that's almost like what the government, it's using that same sort of psychology.
So that ties into a couple other things I wanted to bring up. Number one, like, that's one of the main reasons why I really like Topi. Like, Topi was Genesis Piorage's brainchild, and he started it around like 1983 or something like that. And it was like, it was billed or advertised itself sort of as a deprogramming cult, right? It was a cult itself, but its purpose was to deprogram you from other cults, right?
Right.
But when you look at their propaganda, and I just mean information here at this point, but when you look at the kinds of messages that they put out, like their famous quote, message from the temple, it was about radical self-responsibility. Like, do what thou wilt is not, let's just do whatever we want. No, it's the firmest restriction possible, in that you're supposed to find your one purpose and then only do that.
Right. Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I've been recently looking more into the Temple of the Psychic Youth, and it just seems like really amazing what they were doing at that time, especially during that time period, and even like their use of the different, like the technology given at the time, what they were doing with it is quite amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I liked their vibe probably more than anything else. I never joined their thing, but they had a bunch of publications that they put out, and I paid a lot of attention to that. And I mean, their vibe to me was like what you were saying before. Like, there's all these efforts outside in the world that are trying to like program you, and you need to be careful and deprogram yourself from that, or at least shield yourself from that.
Right, definitely. I think I sent you a link to a video, and I found out that one reason that they kind of fell out, I guess you would say, like they got raided nonstop apparently in England.
Yeah,
and
and
they were
in
like
England,
heavily attacked, and they were all these like propaganda campaigns against them by the government, which makes
yeah,
sense, right? Like these hit pieces, how they're killing babies, or like
yeah,
what was it, like eating aborted babies or something,
right,
just like
right, right.
destroying all these like
That's
films,
why.
writings, and music and stuff. That's so sad.
That's why they ended up coming to California in the early 90s. And actually, a
Mm.
funny little just side story is I was following this story at the time in the early 90s, and so I wrote them. I said, "Hey, you should come to California because everybody here will love you," and
Mhm.
just by like coincidence, they ended up coming to California. Then
Wow.
later he went to New York, but
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, psychic TV basically ended in the early 90s because the British government raided their shit and actually stole a bunch of their shit. And I mean, that
Mhm.
sounds bad, right? But then when you realize though, like Genesis, he held tons of really valuable stuff from, for example, William Burroughs. Like,
Mm.
so this stuff is basically priceless, right? Like, I mean, Burroughs is a person who, a lot of his art is in these museums, and I mean, it's not priceless, but it's not cheap. Like this stuff, if you were to try to buy it, it would be expensive as fuck.
Oh yeah. I mean, Burroughs is a legend too. Even someone in like mainstream, right? And to a degree. I mean, most
Yeah,
people know about him at least. Different writings and movies and whatnot. But yeah, because or Genesis wasn't he or she. I always get that confused. Wasn't he like a student of Burroughs, like
yeah,
a
yeah.
disciple or
Around
something?
when the same year I was born, 1971, is when he first met Burroughs.
Oh wow, that's a trip. Huh?
Yeah,
Very trippy. Yeah, so I definitely see your connections with magic being political.
yeah.
Um, I can see it. I can definitely see that. Um, I do find that a lot of people too have sort of an anarchist take, right? Like I guess a lot of the occult people, they have more of a more of an anarchist, or what would you say?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree. I
I think
agree.
that's a pretty accurate, right, in general.
Yeah, I mean, anarchism, of course, is a really deep philosophy. I mean, a lot of people who don't read about this kind of stuff are not aware, but it has a long history of very thoughtful writing. And like, I mean, you may or may not be sympathetic to this political philosophy, but like, I mean, for example, Chomsky identifies himself as an anarchist.
Hmm.
This is like, and I mean, of course, Chomsky is one of the most serious academics like on the planet, right? I mean,
Oh yeah, yeah, legend. I was actually originally a linguistic major, and that's
really,
like it's yeah, for a very short time, a very short
wow,
time. But what do you think we studied? Like literally the whole first semester was like everything was like
Chomsky,
Chomsky. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. And still to this day, I mean, he's like sort of like the main course of study for linguistics. Yet alone, a lot of people don't even know that, right? A lot of people just know the
yeah,
political
right, right,
YouTube videos or what have you, or maybe books or something. But yeah, political books, that is. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I do definitely see how. I mean, eventually, if you see that, if you see that you can sort of empower yourself, and it's sort of everyone's right to have their power, then you, at the same time, you can kind of see how when you have these government hierarchies that are imposing authority on you and not allowing you to do your will, so to speak, right?
Hmm.
How that's sort of, it's kind of anti-magic in a way, right?
Right. Like if you, for example, look at the at France in the early 18th century, like how much freedom was available to those people. They lived under a feudal system, like not much, right?
Mhm.
So, you know, if you live in a country where, you know, basic political freedoms are not available to you, yeah, I mean, that might be a problem for you, right?
Oh, no doubt, no doubt, for sure. Or if you live in a society where it's like the top 1% has all of the wealth, right? And
Yeah.
really, it's like where just life becomes shittier by the day. It's
Yeah.
yeah, that's definitely not conducive to living a very fulfilling life, and sort of makes it more of a struggle, if anything, right?
Right.
Even
Right.
to get to a baseline where you can kind of actually perform your will or find what it is, right? It's more, you're
Yeah.
still more, it's sort of forcing uh, the large chunk of society to be in survival mode rather than thriving. It's like
Yeah.
keeping the populace at in coping rather than thriving mode of existence, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, very interesting takes. What would you you mentioned a book that you were talking about? What book was that? Were you
You mean Peter
selecting it?
Gray?
Yeah, Peter Gray. Was that a book or an article that you were mentioning?
Yeah, no, it's a book. He released it in 2019, and it's a collection of various Scarlet imprint essays.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, it's called The Brazen Vessel.
2019, The Brazen Vessel. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
What's the so Peter Gray is the he's like the official owner, the founder of Scarlet Imprint.
Yeah, he and his wife Alkistis Dimesh,
Uh-huh.
they and I love her too. Like she has these writings on dance and the body, and like the both of these people, I mean, I am fully like a convert. I love them. I
Yeah,
love them so much.
I believe I heard both of them on a podcast. I believe, God, it must have been. I'll have to look it up. I think that's how I found out about, at least about Peter Gray. But yeah, whatever they're doing, it's working. I mean, they're putting out amazing books, and just like the quality is sort of, it's like
Let me ask you,
top notch.
let
It
me
seems like, right?
let me ask you, have you bought any of their books yet? I mean, like physical books.
That's the thing. I've only got their digital. Uh,
Okay,
I bought from them, but only digitally. Yeah.
I think I might like send you as a gift one of these books, because when you receive them in the mail, oh my God, it's like coming, dude. Oh,
Yeah, for bookophiles, or what's the term? Yeah, for people like
yeah,
us who really
bib-
appreciate good books.
bibliophiles, right,
Oh,
right, right.
bibliophiles, that's the word, right?
Yeah. So like, first of all, the way they wrap and package the books, like before you even open it up, you look at it and you're like, oh, I know that this has not been damaged. No matter how like it got thrown around in the mail, I know this has not got damaged. And then when you open it up, like, oh, it's just the way it's wrapped, and then you look at the actual book itself and like the binding and everything, and you're just like, this is like a piece of art. This is, oh my God. And you just, yeah, it's beautiful.
It's just so well done. What out of the books that you got, do you have any favorites from Scarlet Imprint, or any ones that you're
Okay,
just
so of
blown away
course
with?
there's Encyclopedia Goetica, and that's basically three purchases,
Hmm.
because Jake he split it up into three. So any of those are fine. Uh, the three parts is Cyprian the Mage. Um, um, uh, then there's the Geosophia, and then there's the True Grimoire. And the True Grimoire is Jake's translation of the historical grimoire called the True Grimoire, or
Hmm.
Grimorium Verum.
Hmm.
So that would be the number one. But I mean, I can't imagine that you would go wrong. You could just close your eyes and then point, and find any one of their items is fine. I mean,
Hmm. Hmm. Oh, definitely. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to get some of their physical books here sometime. So, I think I actually might pick up because I heard Jake on a recent interview. He was asked what's the book he's most proud of, or it was
Mm,
something along those lines, and he actually mentioned it wasn't Geo Sophia, but it was Cyprian the Mage, right?
yeah,
And so I
yeah,
think that'd be a cool one to pick up. Maybe if I ever do pick it up and read it, we could have a discussion on. That'd be kind of a fun podcast too.
sweet,
That'd be
sweet.
awesome. Yeah. Um, okay, cool. Yeah, it's a long reading list for a lot of people. I'm sure a lot of people are listening, and at least even if they pick up one of these awesome books, I'm sure they'll
This
get a
is
lot
the
out
bibliophile episode.
of it. That's a good name for it, the Bibliophiles. Like,
Yeah, there you go.
it's like the X Files, but it has like a book in the background or something instead of a UFO. Yeah, that's good. That's good. All right. Do you think we've pretty much covered a lot of the book, or the influences or books that you
Yeah, yeah,
suggest or into?
totally. Yeah, totally. Um, so, okay, but real quick to wrap that up. So, my my influences early on were Topi, Burroughs, Principia Discordia,
Mhm.
Philip K. Dick, Avatam Saka, Vimala Kirti, Songs of Milarepa, Hermann Hesse, Henry Miller, Tom Robbins, Surrealism, Vedanta, Raja Yoga, Austin Spare, Jack Parsons, Rugardi, Thelema, TGD, Cherubim, and Hyatt.
That's not a long list.
No, no, it's a tiny little list.
So small. Okay, those are all areas of interest. The majority of what you mentioned. Um, all right, cool. I think people can get a good idea of what you were, where you're coming from, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what about like currently? Do you still do a lot of practices, or do you kind of is it kind of a like on a like needs basis, or on a, like a regular hygienic basis, or anything like that?
Yeah. Um, my major focus since 2004 has been HGA and Raja Yoga.
Okay, so basically like meditative practices, and are there
Mhm.
other ritual magic practices that you do associated with HGA or anything like that?
Well, now I think that Resh is extremely important, and I try to do it 4 times a day.
Hmm.
I think that um, something like Reguli is extremely helpful.
Hmm.
I don't do it every day, but I do it often. I think Phoenix also, Mass of the Phoenix,
Hmm.
is very helpful. And yeah, those would be probably some of my main daily / weekly type practices,
Hmm. Okay, so a lot of
along with
the
yoga.
core, along with yoga, yeah, along a
Yeah,
lot of the core thelemic rituals, right?
yeah, yeah.
Reguli, I don't know that much about it. Is that like, I mean, I've read through it a long time ago. Is that like almost like a middle pillar exercise, or how would you describe that?
Sure. So the beginning and end part of a regular pentagram ritual is the Kabbalistic cross, but in Reguli, he switches up or he replaces the Kabbalistic cross with something that resembles more like the middle pillar. Um, uh, in that the chakras are explicitly alluded to.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, with the Kabbalistic cross, you have these Christian references, and those are deleted completely. And so instead, you have Thelemic references to Nuit, Hadit, Rahur, Kuit,
Okay, yeah. So it uses the like
Aiwas,
the Thelemic
Dirion, Avalon.
pantheon. Hmm.
Yes,
Hmm. So it uses the Thelemic pantheon in the like the chakra centers
yes,
as vibratory formula.
yes. And then in the quarters, also with a regular pentagram ritual, you've got various god names, Hebrew god names, Eheye, Adonai, right, Yehovah, but those are replaced by the Thelemic pantheon.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds interesting. So it's almost like a hybrid. It's almost like a Thelemic. middle pillar and pentagram ritual in a way.
Well, as I say, the beginning and end of the regular pentagram ritual is the Kabbalistic cross, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But in Reguli, that Kabbalistic cross is replaced by sort of like a middle pillar, and then the middle part of a regular pentagram ritual employs archangels and God names, and those are deleted, and then instead what you get are more references to Thelemic pantheon.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, definitely. I'll have to check that out. I'm going through, as you know, I'm going through Gems of the Equinox currently, and so
that is so badass.
Yeah, it's really, man, it's just nice to have a physical. I've been reading so many texts for so long on PDF form or buying them even on Amazon through Kindle, on ebook mode.
Right.
And God, it's just so much different to have a real book that you can touch and flip through.
For 10 years, I did the same thing from 2004 to 2000. Okay, more like not 10 years, but almost 10 years. I got to Korea in 2004, and for many years, I refused to buy any books because I thought my life is too nomadic, too uncertain. How can I collect books, or how can I justify collecting books? I'm just going to have to move them every fucking year, right? But then I got sort of a more solid job teaching at uni, and I was there for like 7 years. So I'm like, okay, I could buy a book or two here. It's not going to kill me,
Mm-hmm. And a book or two turned into like 100 to 200 to 300. I'm sure you have a pretty substantial library by now, right?
I do. You've seen my Facebook posts, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's nothing like having physical books. That being said, though, I mean, if you can only get access to
PDFs,
like either PDFs, which are especially for books that are what's the term where it's like not like a lot of Crowley's materials, they're
the technical libre.
Is it? No, the word I'm looking for is like in the public domain. Is that the right word?
I see. Yeah, I mean, basically all of those technical libri are in the public domain.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, for books like that where you can easily find them online, and maybe you don't have the money. A lot of people just don't even have the money to buy all these crazy occult texts. I mean, I think it's great that I think there's a website called like oh man, I forgot. Is it like Hermetics.com or something like that, where they have all these books either in text or PDF? There's several websites like that out there where you can just either download or even read them on the website. I think it's a great resource for people who just can't afford all these expensive occult books, right?
Totally. I mean, you probably know, like a lot of Thelemites have very big libraries, and so like the financial commitment with just the library alone is a little bit forbidding.
Right. And with a lot of these books, it's like you pick up one book and it's like, then refer to this in this book. Refer to like one book will lead you to get 10 more, which leads you to get 100 more. Like it becomes this compounding thing, right? And so, to a degree, like at least for me, I mean, for me, the main thing is also like moving around a lot and all these other things. But it's more useful for me to get like ones, like essential ones that I feel like I'll so something like Gems of the Equinox, where it's like that's like a lifetime book. And every now and then maybe get like a one that might not be a lifetime book, like a pleasure book or something like that. But yeah.
Well, Gems is very thick, but roughly half of it minimum is like extremely practical. It's not theoretical text.
Right, exactly. So something like that is just good to have physically, right? And I think I saw a Facebook post recently. It was Frater Acker, I don't know how you pronounce it. But he posted like it's almost like a guide for buying books. Like, do I really need this book? Is it going to be? Is it going to be? Especially for people who buy a lot of books, or maybe they don't even buy a lot of books. But it's sort of like, is it really worth getting this specific book, right? Physically, I think that's kind of a good guide. You can look at it. But
that's cool.
It's like filtering whether you really need it or have you even Yeah, it's kind of determining. I think it's a good little like rubric to review, but yeah, okay. So you practice a lot of the core Thelemic rituals pretty
Yeah.
regularly,
Yes.
and along with yoga, which I think a lot of people are sort of surprised when they hear that. I think Crowley, one thing that a lot of people who haven't really read him don't know, that he sort of brought in the Eastern mysticism. He brought in the yoga and things like this. So a lot of people might be surprised who aren't really well versed on this stuff, like, oh, yoga and magic, like what's the correlation? But I think Crowley, one of his like main contributions was sort of bringing sort of practices from the East
Yeah.
into the Western practices, right?
Yeah.
And so
I was a little bit skeptical actually for many years about his actual exposure to yoga. But then
mhm,
like if you read Equinox Volume 1, Number 4, it's about 2 years worth roughly of journals, like from '03 to '04. No, I'm sorry, more like '01 to '03.
mhm,
And it details it just in depth his daily practice with Alan Bennett. And I don't think you can read this and come away and think to yourself, oh, Crowley was a fake. No fucking way. The guy
mhm.
was the real deal. Whatever else he was, you might not like him, you might not whatever, but one thing you cannot say is that he was a fake. He definitely was not.
Right, right. And he was definitely one of the first Westerners. At least I
Yeah,
wouldn't say like
totally.
he was exactly the first, but he was one of the early Westerners to go over. I mean, if you look at like where he was traveling, like India and Nepal and what was it, like Burma or
Yeah.
all these countries, and sort of digging into these texts. He's sort of the underappreciated, like bringing yoga to the West, right? One of the like,
Right. Well, so previously you had these various scholars who would present this material in a very scholarly way, and that's valuable. But one of the cool things about Crowley was he didn't just like read these things.
mhm,
He practiced with, and he didn't just practice with Alan Bennett. He also practiced with people who were native of that area.
mhm,
And so his like real day-to-day experience was not just book knowledge, you know.
mhm. Yeah, exactly. So.
And so
Mhm.
his first publications along these lines are the Equinox. And so that's around 1909, 1910. And so before that time, like I'm not aware of any Westerner having deep practice knowledge of this kind of stuff. I mean, there might be people, but I'm not aware of them.
Right, exactly. Like I was saying, he might not have been the first, but I mean, at least in recorded history, who at least somebody who went over there, did the practices, recorded them,
Yeah.
published some of them. I mean, he's definitely pioneering in that regard. So,
Mm.
and there's also a recent book by
Churton.
Churton. Yeah, what was it? It's like Crowley. What's the name of it? Do you recall?
Something about Crowley in India. I'm not sure.
Yeah, something like that. But I think you mentioned you might have a copy of it, but I think that would be interesting to read, just from just because it's an interesting story that a lot of people don't
It
know about.
is. It is. I mean,
Yeah.
like so the East, quote unquote, is a huge area, and Crowley ends up exploring a fuck ton of the East. He doesn't just like visit China, Japan, and Thailand and then go home. No, this motherfucker treks across the whole goddamn place.
Right, right, right. Yeah, it's amazing. Quite amazing how, like, yeah, for sure. Like in the '60s, you had he's almost like the original hippie, right? Because if you
Yeah,
look at like,
yeah.
it was almost like marketed like it was the '60s where people first took drugs and then they went over to India, but like he was doing this like
Yeah, 100
60,
years before. Yeah.
yeah, or whatever, right? Like a long time prior to that.
Mm,
So
yeah.
yeah, that's kind of trippy. And most people are just going to India to like a single guru or ashram. Like this dude's going to like Myanmar and like all these
Yeah.
obscure, all these obscure spots.
Well, and most people who did that in the 60s are, it's sort of like a vacation for them. I think you know, they go for 1 or 2 weeks and then they go home. I mean, now obviously,
spiritual tourism, basically.
right. Now, I mean, obviously some people stay for a year or more and they took it seriously, but I think a lot of people stayed a week or two and then went home, you know.
Right, right. It kind of reminds me, I spent it was a little over a month in Bali, and that's kind of like the vibe of Bali. It's like you have a lot of people who go there for like a week to find themselves and go to the yoga
Yeah,
studio,
yeah.
the ashram, yoga ashrams, and like Ubud, it's called, right? And it kind of sort of the. I mean, I don't want to bash these people or anything like that. Like,
Right.
it's enriching your life. I mean, it's cool, but there certainly is a we can certainly distinguish between somebody going to all these countries and journaling these practices meticulously, right?
Yes.
Versus somebody who went for a snapshot for Instagram or something like that. It's definitely not the same thing.
The other cool thing about Equinox Volume 1, Number 4 is like the number of texts like the Shiva Samhita and the Yoda Pradipika, like the number of like texts that are classics that he ends up discussing in this, like it's only about 150 pages, this section, but it's very dense. Like he has not only firsthand day-to-day experience with the meditation practices, but he can intelligently discuss the various things that are talked about in these texts. So it's a pretty impressive, like or helpful book to buy if you happen to be interested in yoga.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And what's the name of the book? 8 Lectures on Yoga. That's another of his. That's a great, I mean, it's not only great, like a great yoga information or knowledge, but it's very funny and interesting, and it's not dry at all. It's like, it's almost like, I almost feel like out of what I've read of Crowley's, that might even be like the first thing I would advise people to read.
Recommend?
Yeah, because I think if you read that, you're just like, holy shit, not only is it like enlightening, and not only is it useful and like practical in some ways, but it's like entertaining and interesting and funny and
well, I think one reason why that book shines so brightly is because it's one of the last things he writes.
Interesting.
I think the last thing that he writes is the Book of Thoth, but a couple years before the Book of Thoth, he does these lectures, and then they're transcribed later and then published. But yeah, he's like he's early 60s at this point. So he's this old grandpa who doesn't give a fuck anymore.
Yeah, he's sort of unhinged, right?
Well, I mean not unhinged, but like he's not like the world and his path and and everything is no longer weighing him down at all. He's like he's free, you know. Yeah,
right. That's what I meant to say, for sure. One question I'm curious to ask you, because
sure,
you've been in this culture or whatever you want to call it for quite a long time, right? You said since the late 80s, is that right?
That's right. So about almost 33 years.
I'm just curious from your perspective, like what sort of like major shifts have you seen, or how would you relate? Okay, so since you came at like maybe then, well, not maybe then, you came into this sort of in the late 80s, and a lot of people who are listening to this maybe are just now finding out about this or getting into these topics and practices. What would you say have been like major what are some major differences or like shifts in the tide, so to speak?
Okay, so I'm glad you brought this up, because this was definitely one of the things I wanted to briefly discuss. I feel like and Jake has on his Facebook has sort of confirmed this, but I feel like in the 70s and in the 80s, the occult scene, quote unquote, was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. Like people were doing their own thing. They were innovating. They were exploring. But I feel like after the late 80s, a lot of that innovation and freedom and whatever goes way downhill and disappears. So in the 80s, in the 70s and the 80s, you have, for example, chaos magic, and then soon after the 80s begin, you have Topi, but yeah, like Topi ends up, he shuts that down in the early 90s because of the pushback from the British government, right? So yeah, I think things go a little bit silent after the early 90s. And my experience is that we right now are in a bit of a cool revival stage. Like things are getting exciting again.
Yeah, it does seem like that. At least from my perspective, it does seem like it's almost like almost like a mini renaissance. There are people like experimenting with new things, and a lot of people, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast, are sort of digging more into the past. Sort of. I think I mentioned like the marriage of like practitioners and scholarship and history. I mean, that's probably a somewhat new thing. You know, not like it wasn't happening in the 70s or 80s, but there's definitely like a huge resurgence of it right now. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like people got comfortable in the early 90s and thought that magic was this, and so they did this, and they'd stop, and they decided they were comfortable and they didn't need to like look for new things at all, or they didn't need to like try new things, that they knew what Magick and Thelema and everything was, and they had it all figured out. And don't show me new stuff. I don't want to see new stuff. Like I know what this is. I'm comfortable with it. But like nowadays, like people are like, you know what? Nobody knows anything. Let's just try anything, you know? Let's try anything.
Yeah, it's good keeping an open mind if you can, you know. I mean, that's I think that seems like a really cool aspect of the chaos magic scene, like you're mentioning, is that it was so experimental. And I think that that mindset in general is very useful in life in general, not only in this area, but having an open mind, experimenting, recording results. I think that's really how you have amazing experiences, and also potentially dangerous experiences too. But nothing really worth doing is not going to have an element of risk as long as you're smart about it, right? But I think having that sort of experimental spirit is important. And even like if you go back to the Crowley stuff, it's like, do the practices, journal it, experiment, and sort of see the results, right? Like be experimental and scientific at the same time.
One of the things that he says a lot, which I appreciate, is, you know, other people are not in a position to comment about what you do. Like your practice is yours. Like you're the best judge of the rightness of your practice, you know? I mean, of course you can obtain guidance from other people. That's possible. But at the end of the day, you're responsible for what you do. And, you know, if other people don't like it, that's their problem.
Yeah, that's a very liberating thing, right? Like it's really, at the end of the day, you can only judge based on your experiences, and your no one can really confer anything onto you that you haven't really conferred onto yourself, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, on the one hand, like, for example, with writing, I think one of the keys to writing is you have to share with other people and get some feedback. So with this on the same idea, like with magic, you should not be like hermetically closed off from the world. You need to get feedback somehow, but this feedback should not control you. You should look at it intelligently as an independent person, you know, who has their own mind.
Oh, for sure. All right. Is there anything else? Actually, we're almost into 2 hours here. Are there any other? We made some notes previously. Are there any other things you would like to go over?
Let's see. I think we've covered most everything. Yeah, I think we've done a really amazing job of covering stuff.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Definitely gonna have to go listen back to this one. It was a good conversation, and I think it'd be cool to have like a round two later on down the line, maybe after I get. We're talking about Encyclopedia Goetica, maybe even
Yeah,
covering
like
like because everyone I know, including you, like they always mention Geosophia, Geosophia, and it was
yeah.
great. Don't get me wrong, but I haven't read Cyprian the Mage, and I almost never even really hear it mentioned. It's sort of like the bastard child of the series or something like that. It seems
Yeah.
like because I mean, you rarely hear it mentioned, even right? Like it's mentioned as part of
Well,
the trilogy, but I haven't really seen people go into it or discuss it. So that would be kind of a cool, like a different thing. I feel like too, even if we, I can read it and then take some notes. Maybe you can review it. We could do a little discourse on it. That'd be fun.
sweet. I'd love it. Our next episode, you and I, whatever we end up doing, we should drill in on one or two things because we were all over the map here.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Well, it's good to do different styles, right? Like,
Oh
I
yeah,
think
no,
a lot of people enjoy a conversation like this where it's all over
no,
the
I don't
map.
think it was a, I don't think it was a bad thing, but just yeah, it was very, very general and that kind of thing.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And then, yeah, the next one we'll have we'll come prepared. Maybe it'll be a video one. We'll have our PowerPoint slides. It'll be the opposite.
Yeah, baby,
Like
PowerPoint.
the professional podcast. Yeah.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Okay, well, I guess we can wrap up here, and I'll. Is there any? That's another thing. Is there anything you would like to link or shout out? Because I can link it in the show notes for people.
Um, let's see. I would just say, um, if you're interested in Golden Dawn stuff, there's a lot of various sources for that. But in my opinion, one of the better sources is David's material. And unfortunately, it's not always easy to find. So I will give you a link where that can help people to find the TGD stuff.
Oh, that would be great. Okay, I'll definitely include that in the show notes, and people can look into that. And as I mentioned, I'm sure that if people listen to this podcast all the way through, they're going to have a whole list of stuff to look into too, if they haven't already, dove into all that stuff. So, all right, cool. All right, well, thanks for coming on, Bune, and until next time.
Ryan, it's been a pleasure.